Mail-order bride can't bear children. Rancher with 6 orphans says she's answer to his prayers. Evelyn Grace Harper, a gentle but determined woman in her late 20s, rides west with trembling hands and a heart full of secrets. Once a teacher in St. Louis, she answered a mail-order bride ad from a widowed rancher named Caleb McAllister, who needed help raising 6 orphan children left by neighbors and kin. But Evelyn hides the truth, after a terrible illness years ago. Now let's dive into the story and find out what illness is she hiding from and what happened next to her. Wyoming Territory, 1889, the edge of the known world. The train wailed like a lonely animal as it cut through the endless prairie. Dust and sunlight danced across the windows, and Evelyn Grace Harper sat stiff-backed on the worn seat, her gloved hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles turned white. Every jolt of the train seemed to rattle the secret in her chest. Outside, the land stretched wide and wild, miles of open country broken by cottonwoods and the shimmer of distant mountains. It was a land for new beginnings, the newspaper ad had said. A place to start over. But as the locomotive slowed toward Jackson Creek Station, Evelyn wasn't sure if she was running to something, or from everything she'd lost. She smoothed the hem of her travel dress, her reflection flickering faintly in the glass. The woman who stared back looked older than 28. Not from years, but from the weight of what she carried, the secret she'd sworn never to speak aloud again. She reached into her satchel and unfolded a letter, its edges soft from being read too many times. I seek not beauty but kindness. Not perfection but heart. A mother's hands even if they've never held a child. Caleb McAllister, Jackson Creek, Wyoming Territory. Evelyn's throat tightened as she traced the ink with trembling fingers. A mother's hands. If only he knew. The train screeched into the tiny depot, a single platform, a water tower, and a cluster of rough-hewn buildings. The wind smelled of sagebrush and horse sweat. A dog barked somewhere in the distance, and a horse snorted, stamping against the boards. When the conductor opened the door and called her name, Evelyn gathered her satchel, took one trembling breath and stepped down into the dust. The sun was fierce overhead, the kind that bleaches the world pale. A small crowd had gathered near the station, a few ranch hands, a freckled telegraph boy, and one man standing apart from the rest. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his hat pulled low against the glare. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing forearms darkened by sun and work. Beside him stood 6 children in mismatched clothes, their faces a mix of curiosity and caution. Evelyn's breath caught. 6 of them. The man stepped forward, his voice deep and quiet. Mrs. Harper? She nodded, her voice nearly catching. Yes, sir. Though soon to be Mrs. McAllister, I suppose. He tipped his hat with a faint smile that didn't quite reach his tired eyes. Caleb McAllister. Welcome to Jackson Creek, ma'am. For a heartbeat, neither moved. The whistle faded, the world hushed, and Evelyn felt the strangeness of the moment. 2 strangers bound by paper promises, standing on the edge of forever. A little girl no older than 6 clutched Caleb's pant leg, peeking out shyly. This here's Ruthie, Caleb said gently. And that scowlin' one is Annie. Don't mind her, she thinks she runs the place. Annie, a tall girl of 14 with fiery braids, crossed her arms and gave Evelyn a look that could have sliced stone. Evelyn knelt down so her eyes were level with Ruthie's. It's lovely to meet you all, she said softly. I brought peppermint sticks from the city if anyone likes sweet things. The smallest boy's eyes widened. The others exchanged unsure glances. Only Annie muttered, we don't need city candy. Caleb cleared his throat, breaking the tension. Got a wagon out back. It's a ways to the ranch. Hope you don't mind the dust. Evelyn smiled faintly. I've been dusted by worse, Mr. McAllister. He chuckled, a low, rusty sound as if laughter had been a stranger to him for a long time. Call me Caleb. Mr. McAllister makes me feel like my father's ghost is standin' behind me. The ride to the ranch was long and silent except for the creak of the wagon and the occasional murmur of the children. Evelyn watched the land roll by, endless plains giving way to distant blue peaks. A hawk wheeled overhead. The air smelled of pine and freedom. It should have felt like hope. But all Evelyn could feel was the pounding of her heart against her ribs. At one point, little Ruthie climbed into her lap, her curls tickling Evelyn's chin. The girl smelled of sun and hay. Evelyn held her close and for a moment, the ache in her chest softened. But it was short-lived. Caleb caught her gaze briefly, something like gratitude passing between them. Then his eyes returned to the road, his jaw tightening with the same weight she carried, different burdens maybe but both born of loss. By the time they reached the ranch, the sun was dropping behind the hills. The house stood sturdy and weathered, with smoke curling from the chimney and a worn cross nailed above the door. Evelyn stepped down from the wagon, her boots crunching on the dry earth. She could smell supper, beans and bacon, faint and comforting. She turned toward Caleb, unsure what to say. He removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. "It ain't much," he said quietly, "but it's home. I reckon we'll have the preacher out tomorrow. Figured no sense waitin'. Evelyn's throat tightened. "Tomorrow? Seems right," he said simply. "Kids need a mother and I could use someone who ain't afraid to stay." Her pulse fluttered. "I'm not afraid," she whispered. But deep down she was terrified, not of the land, not of the work, but of the moment he might discover the truth that could break this fragile dream apart. As twilight fell, she followed him toward the house, 6 children watching her from the porch. The wind rose soft through the cottonwoods, whispering like a prayer she didn't know how to finish. And as the door creaked shut behind her, Evelyn Grace Harper, mail-order bride, teacher, secret bearer, stepped into the beginning of a life she never expected. The rooster's cry came before dawn, echoing off the distant hills. Evelyn stirred from the narrow bed, momentarily forgetting where she was. The room smelled of cedar and hearth smoke. The walls were bare except for a small wooden cross above the window. Her first morning as Mrs. Evelyn McAllister. The title still felt too large, like a coat that didn't quite fit her shoulders. Outside, the wind whispered across the valley. When she pulled back the curtain, she saw the land in the silver light of early morning, rolling pastures, dark spruce woods, and the faint outlines of cattle grazing near the creek. It was breathtaking in its wildness, yet intimidating in its silence. Downstairs, the sounds of life were already stirring. A pot clattering, a child's sneeze, Caleb's deep voice giving gentle orders. She smoothed her hair, straightened her apron, and went down the narrow stairs, hoping her new family would not see how frightened she truly was. The kitchen was a whirlwind of motion. The eldest girl, Annie, stood at the stove stirring cornmeal mush, her jaw tight with focus. The younger children darted about like sparrows, arguing over spoons and slices of bread. Caleb stood near the door, buttoning his suspenders and lacing his boots, preparing for a long day out with the cattle. When he saw Evelyn, his eyes softened. "Mornin', Mrs. McAllister," he said, voice low and respectful. She smiled, shy but trying. "Evelyn, please. I'm not used to being a Mrs. yet." He nodded once. "Evelyn then. Hope you slept well. It gets mighty cold this time of year, draft sneaks in from the east wall." "It was peaceful," she lied, though she had hardly slept a wink for thinking of all that awaited her. Little Ruthie toddled over with a wooden doll missing one arm. "Pa, Annie won't let me have honey on my mush." Caleb crouched down, his patience steady. "You know honey's for Sundays, sweetheart." "But it feels like Sunday," Ruthie said earnestly. A soft chuckle escaped Evelyn before she could stop it. The sound drew the attention of every child in the room, 6 pairs of eyes blinking at her as if seeing her for the first time. For a long moment no one spoke. Then Tommy, the quiet 12-year-old, pushed a bowl toward her. "You can have mine, ma'am," he said softly. Evelyn's heart ached. "No, Tommy, you keep your breakfast. I'll make my own." She tied on an apron and began washing dishes in the basin, pretending confidence she didn't feel. Her city hands were unused to rough work. She dropped a tin cup, and the clang made Annie flinch. Annie's voice came sharp and cold. "You don't have to do that. I've been keepin' house just fine." Evelyn turned slowly, her tone gentle but firm. "Then maybe you can teach me how you like things done." Annie hesitated, torn between pride and surprise. "If you mean to stay," she muttered, "you best learn quick." "I mean to stay," Evelyn said quietly, meeting the girl's glare with steady eyes. "I've nowhere else I'd rather be." Caleb, standing in the doorway, heard it. He didn't say a word, but his shoulders eased a little as he stepped out into the rising light. The day stretched long. Evelyn scrubbed floors until her hands stung, helped Ellie gather eggs, and burned her first attempt at biscuits. The children giggled until she laughed with them, and somehow the laughter made the house feel lighter. That evening, after supper, Caleb returned late, covered in dust, his face drawn with exhaustion. He washed at the pump, water running cold over his hands, then came inside to find the table cleared, the children in their nightclothes, and the smell of stew lingering in the air. Evelyn stood by the hearth, sewing a rip in little James's shirt by lamplight. When she looked up, her hair glowed amber in the fire's warmth. "Stew's on the stove if you're hungry," she said. He sat down heavily, nodding. "You made all this?" "With Annie's help," she said, smiling at the girl, who pretended not to notice but blushed all the same. Caleb tasted the stew and gave a slow, thoughtful nod. Better'n mine. Low praise, Pa, Tommy teased. Your stew's mostly water. The children laughed, and even Caleb's lips twitched with amusement. The tension that had haunted the house since Evelyn's arrival seemed to ease that night, replaced by something tentative and fragile, like a bridge being built between strangers. Later, after the children were asleep, Evelyn stood by the window, watching the moon drift over the dark fields. Caleb was outside again, checking the barn lanterns. His silhouette moved slow and sure through the shadows. She pressed a hand to her stomach, the secret aching there like an old scar. She thought of Ruthie's small arms around her, of the laughter at supper, of the way Caleb's eyes softened whenever he looked at his children. He deserved someone who could give him more, someone whole, unbroken. But fate had not granted her that gift. When Caleb finally came inside, he lingered by the doorway, hat in hand. You did good today, he said simply. Kids took to you better than I figured. Evelyn smiled faintly. They're wonderful children. You've raised them well. He gave a quiet laugh. I just try to keep him fed and out of the creek. The Lord did the raising. They stood in the golden light of the fire, words hovering between them like moths. At last he said, Get some rest, Evelyn. Tomorrow'll be another long one. When he turned to go, she wanted to call after him, to tell him everything, to confess the truth before love or comfort could take root. But the words froze in her throat. Instead, she whispered a prayer when he was gone. Lord, give me strength to be what they need, even if I never can be what they deserve. Outside, the coyotes called across the valley, and the wind sighed through the cottonwoods. The McAllister ranch slept under a blanket of starlight, a house of weary souls, quietly mending in the hands of grace. The sun rose over Jackson Creek like a coin on fire, spilling gold across the dusty main street. Wagons rolled through the town, horses clopped on the planks, and the smell of fresh bread drifted from the bakery. Evelyn had been in Wyoming nearly a month now, and still each morning felt both familiar and foreign. The rhythm of ranch life was settling into her bones. The clatter of pails, the creak of the pump, the laughter and quarrels of children under one roof. Yet today she was nervous. She was going into town alone for the first time. Caleb had asked her to fetch supplies, flour, lamp oil, and medicine for Ruthie's cough. It was a simple errand, but her heart pounded as she tied on her bonnet and climbed into the wagon. She wasn't afraid of the miles or the horses. She was afraid of the eyes. In a town like Jackson Creek, gossip traveled faster than wine through sagebrush. And a mail-order bride, especially one who'd arrived with 6 children overnight, was a story too tempting for tongues to stay still. The wagon rumbled down the road, past rolling hills dusted with sage and buttercups. She tried to enjoy the beauty of it, the wildflowers, the sky so wide it made her dizzy, but her thoughts returned to St. Louis, to the small doctor's office with the white curtains and the quiet words that had changed her life. I'm sorry, Miss Harper. The fever damaged more than we hoped. You won't be able to bear children. Even now, the memory of that sterile room made her stomach twist. She'd buried that pain, sealed it behind a polite smile. But here, in this rugged place where children were as necessary as air, that secret felt heavier each day. When she reached town, people paused to watch her. A few smiled politely. Others stared a bit too long. She tied the wagon near the general store, lifted her chin, and walked in with the grace of someone trying not to tremble. The bell jingled. Inside, the air smelled of tobacco, coffee, and dust. Shelves lined with bolts of calico and tins of biscuits gleamed in the sunlight. "Morning, Mrs. McAllister," called Mr. Drummond, the shopkeeper, wiping his hands on his apron. "Fine day for a ride, eh?" Caleb too busy to come himself. Evelyn smiled softly. "The herd's keeping him busy. I'm just here for some flour and lamp oil, if you please." Behind her, 2 women by the sewing thread rack exchanged a glance. One of them, a plump lady in a blue hat, whispered just loud enough for Evelyn to hear. "Mail-order bride, I heard. Poor soul, marrying a man with 6 children, mercy." The other sked. Or maybe she fancied herself clever. "A woman alone don't survive long without a man's name out here." Their words pricked like cactus thorns. Evelyn kept her gaze on the counter, counting out her coins with steady hands. But her ears burned. "Need anything else, ma'am?" Mr. Drummond asked kindly, pretending not to notice. "Yes," she said after a pause. "Some peppermint candies. For the children." His eyes softened. "They'll like that. Good kids, those McAllisters. You're doing right by them." Her throat tightened. "I hope so." When she stepped outside, she nearly bumped into Mrs. Pretty, the preacher's wife, an imposing woman with sharp eyes and a starched collar that looked like it could slice wood. "Mrs. McAllister," she said, her smile as tight as her corset. "How are you settling in?" Evelyn forced a polite smile. "We're managing well, thank you." Mrs. Pretty's gaze lingered too long. "And how do you find the responsibility of so many little ones? Caleb's such a devoted father. Surely you'll be wanting children of your own soon." Evelyn froze, the air turning thin. She felt her pulse throb in her ears. She swallowed hard. "The Lord will decide what's meant to be," she said gently, and turned away before the woman could see the tears burning her eyes. By the time she reached the wagon, her composure was slipping. She loaded the supplies with shaking hands, blinking hard against the sting of humiliation. The gossip, the questions, they were knives twisting her secret open for the world to see. She climbed onto the wagon bench, grabbed the reins and snapped them lightly. "Come on, Daisy," she murmured to the mare. "Let's go home." The horse started forward, hooves kicking up little storms of dust. Halfway down the road, she spotted a familiar figure riding hard toward her. Caleb, his broad frame on horseback, hat pulled low against the sun. He slowed as he approached, concern creasing his brow. "You left earlier than I thought," he said. "Didn't want you making the trip alone." "I managed fine," she said, though her voice trembled. He studied her face. "Something happen?" She hesitated, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Just words, that's all. Town talk." She gave a small nod. "Seems folks have opinions about what kind of woman marries a man like you." Caleb's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. "Folks always talk. It don't matter what they say, Evelyn." "It shouldn't," she murmured. "But somehow it still does." They rode side by side in silence for a while, the wind tugging at her bonnet, the sound of grass brushing against the wagon wheels. Finally, Caleb said quietly, "When my first wife passed, I thought no woman would ever set foot in my home again, let alone raise 6 young uns that ain't her blood. You did. That says more about you than their gossip ever could." Evelyn turned her face toward him, startled by the gentleness in his tone. "You're too kind." He shook his head. "Not kind. Just thankful. You've brought something back to that house. Laughter, warmth. Don't let him make you doubt that." Something in her heart loosened. The sky stretched wide and blue above them, and for the first time since arriving in Wyoming, she felt steady. When they reached the ranch, the children came running, shouting and laughing. Ruthie climbed into her lap before she could even step down, squealing at the sight of the peppermint candies. Caleb watched from the wagon, arms crossed, his expression soft. The evening light caught his face, highlighting the lines of weariness and something deeper, hope, maybe, or healing. As Evelyn handed out the sweets, she thought, maybe this is what grace feels like. Not loud or grand, but quiet, like being chosen when you least deserve it. She looked back at the horizon where town dust still hung in the air and whispered under her breath, "Let them talk. I have a home now." That night, long after the children slept, Evelyn stood on the porch, the scent of sage and wood smoke in the air. Caleb came beside her, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "Tomorrow'll be a hard day," he said. "Rain's coming and the herd'll need rounding before the creek floods." She nodded, taking the mug from him. "Then I'll help." He raised a brow. "You'll get wet." "I don't mind." He smiled faintly, that rare, quiet smile that made her heart flutter. "Didn't figure you would." Thunder rumbled far off in the distance. The first drops of rain began to fall, soft and steady, washing away the dust of Jackson Creek and the sting of careless words. And as they stood together beneath the porch light, side by side against the gathering storm, Evelyn began to believe, just barely, that perhaps she truly belonged. The storm began as a whisper. A low, distant rumble rolling across the mountains, the kind of sound the land seems to feel before the sky ever darkens. By noon, the wind had turned restless. It raced across the McAllister Valley, bending the cottonwoods and carrying with it the scent of rain. Chickens scurried for shelter. Horses shifted uneasily in their stalls. Evelyn stood on the porch, her apron tugged by the wind, watching gray clouds crawl over the peaks like dark beasts. The children's laughter drifted from the yard as they gathered laundry from the line. She called out gently, "Annie, take the little ones inside. There's a storm coming fast." The eldest girl squinted at the sky, defiant as ever. "We've had rain before." "Not like this," Evelyn said quietly. Behind her, the screen door creaked open. Caleb stepped out, coat already on, hat pulled low. He looked up at the clouds with the wary eyes of a man who'd learned to read danger in the sky. "Cattle are still in the south pasture," he said. "If that creek floods, we'll lose half the herd." Evelyn's stomach twisted. "You can't go alone." He smiled faintly. "I've done it before." Then you shouldn't have to anymore, she replied, a quiet firmness in her tone. Caleb met her eyes. There was something there, admiration maybe or surprise, but he shook his head. Keep the children safe, Evelyn. That's your job. He turned and strode toward the barn. The wind lifted his coat like a sail. The sky broke an hour later. Lightning forked through the clouds and thunder rolled so close it rattled the windows. Rain came down in sheets, drumming against the roof, drowning out every sound but its own fury. Inside, Evelyn moved quickly, shuttering windows, checking the stove, calming the little ones who clung to her skirts. Only Annie refused to stay inside. He'll need help. Annie shouted over the roar of the storm. The calf's out there, she was born just yesterday, she'll drown. Annie, no. Evelyn called, but the girl was already running, a flash of red hair vanishing into the downpour. Heart pounding, Evelyn snatched her shawl and lantern, pushing out into the storm. The rain hit like cold bullets. The ground had turned to mud beneath her boots, and the wind tore at her skirt. She could barely see beyond the flickering lantern light, but she kept going, shouting Annie's name. Annie! Annie, come back! Lightning flashed. There, across the creek, she caught sight of the girl struggling to free a calf tangled in brush. The water was rising fast, brown and wild. Evelyn's stomach dropped. Without thinking, she waded in. The current nearly took her legs out from under her, but she braced against it, gripping a branch for balance. Annie, she cried again. Leave it, come to me. I can't. Annie shouted, tears mixing with rain. She'll die. You'll die if you stay. Evelyn fought her way forward, her skirts dragging heavy with mud and water. The calf bleated weakly, its tiny body trembling. Evelyn reached out, grabbed Annie's wrist, and pulled with every ounce of strength she had. Another flash of lightning, then a shadow on horseback came thundering through the storm. Evelyn! Caleb's voice bellowed above the thunder. Hold on. He swung from the saddle, boots splashing into the torrent. In one motion he hauled both women toward him, grabbing Annie first, then Evelyn. The current tugged hard, nearly knocking all three from their feet. Let it go, he shouted. But Evelyn twisted back, pushing the calf toward higher ground before Caleb finally pulled her free. Together they stumbled up the bank, gasping, soaked to the bone. He wrapped his coat around both of them as the rain poured on, his chest heaving. Annie clung to his arm, sobbing apologies. Evelyn knelt in the mud, trembling, half from cold, half from the shock of how close it had been. When she finally looked up, Caleb was kneeling beside her, water dripping from his hat brim, his hand gripping her shoulder. You could have been killed, he said, voice low but shaking. So could she, Evelyn whispered. He stared at her for a long moment, rain streaking down both their faces, thunder growling like an old god above them. Then, in a voice rough with emotion, he said, I didn't think I'd ever see another woman fight for my young uns like that. Evelyn swallowed hard. I'd fight for them as if they were my own. He looked at her as though seeing her for the first time, not as a stranger brought by letter, but as something more. Then he nodded, helped her to her feet, and said softly, Let's get home. By the time they reached the house, night had fallen. The storm still raged, but the warmth inside felt like salvation. Annie cried quietly in Evelyn's arms, whispering, I'm sorry, Ma. I didn't mean to make trouble. Evelyn froze at the word Ma, small, accidental, yet it pierced her heart. She smoothed Annie's wet hair and whispered, You're safe, that's all that matters. Caleb stood in the doorway, his gaze resting on the two of them. For a long moment he said nothing. Then quietly, Thank you. Evelyn looked up. For what? For being here when we needed you most. The fire crackled. Outside, rain beat against the roof, relentless and alive. But inside there was warmth, the kind that wasn't just from flame, but from hearts thawing after a long winter of grief. Later that night, when the house was still, Evelyn sat by the hearth, wrapped in a quilt, her body sore and heavy with exhaustion. Caleb came in silently, carrying 2 steaming mugs of tea. He handed one to her and sat across from the fire. After a while he said softly, You could have died out there. So could you, she murmured, meeting his eyes. But you went anyway. He smiled faintly, weary but sincere. Guess we're both stubborn. They sat in quiet for a long while, the firelight flickering between them. Then Caleb said, I used to think the Lord was done sending me help. Tonight proved me wrong. Evelyn looked into the fire, blinking back tears. Then maybe he hasn't given up on either of us yet. Outside the storm began to fade. The thunder softened to a far-off murmur, and rain turned to a whisper against the eaves. In that quiet, Caleb's gaze lingered on Evelyn, a woman who had walked out of the storm carrying courage he hadn't known he was still searching for. And though neither said it, both felt it. Something had changed. Something had begun. The world smelled of rain and sagebrush after the storm. For the next few days everything slowed down, the earth seemed to breathe again, and so did they. The creek ran high but calm now, glinting under the sun. Caleb's cattle grazed safely on the upper field, and for the first time in weeks, laughter echoed across the yard again. Evelyn heard it from the kitchen window, children chasing each other through puddles, their boots splashing mud. Annie was helping little Tommy make a boat from bark and twine. Even the quietest of the brood, Jonah, smiled when Evelyn brought out fresh cornbread and honey. For a moment she allowed herself to imagine that this was home, truly hers. The family, the laughter, the feeling of belonging she hadn't known she'd missed so badly. But the truth weighed heavy in her chest, like a secret she'd buried alive. And the longer she stayed, the more it stirred. That evening Caleb joined her on the porch. The sky was streaked in red and gold, the kind of sunset that made even a weary man stand still to watch. He leaned against the post, hat low, arms crossed, quiet as ever. "You saved my girl," he said finally, breaking the silence. "Still can't thank you enough for that." Evelyn smiled faintly. "You don't have to. She's a brave one. Reminds me of someone." He chuckled softly. "Her ma." Annie's got her eyes and her temper. Evelyn glanced at him. "Do you still miss her?" He nodded, slow and solemn. "Every day. But not with pain anymore. Just gratitude for what she gave me." His gaze shifted toward the children playing in the yard. "For them?" He turned to her then, his voice quieter. "You've done right by them, Evelyn. They've taken to you better than I ever hoped." Her throat tightened. "They're good children, Caleb. They're your children now too," he said simply. She froze. The words, meant kindly, felt like a knife. Her breath hitched as the weight of her secret pressed harder. Caleb noticed her stillness, frowned slightly. "Something wrong?" Evelyn forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "No. Just tired." But that night, long after the house had gone quiet, she sat awake in the little room off the kitchen, staring at her hands trembling in the lamplight. She couldn't keep lying. Not to him. Not when he looked at her like that, like she belonged. The next morning she went out early, the sky still pale with dawn. She found Caleb mending a fence near the pasture. The sound of hammering stopped when he saw her. "You're up early," he said, setting the tool aside. "Something on your mind?" She hesitated. "There's something I haven't told you. Something you deserve to know." Caleb's brow furrowed, concern flickering across his face. "Go on." Evelyn took a deep breath, fingers twisting in her apron. "When I came here, I did so under false hope. You wrote that you wanted a wife who could raise your children, who could give you more someday. I thought I could be that for you." Her voice broke. "But I can't." Caleb's expression softened, confused. "What do you mean?" "I can't have children, Caleb." Her words came out small, trembling. "The doctor back in Kansas said it plain. There were complications years ago. I nearly died, and afterward I was told I'd never bear a child. Ever." Silence fell. The wind rustled through the dry grass, and a hawk cried somewhere far above. Caleb didn't move. His eyes searched her face, and for a moment he looked almost wounded. Evelyn's hand shook. "I wanted to tell you sooner, but I was afraid. Afraid you'd send me away. Afraid you'd think I deceived you." Caleb turned away, jaw tight. He took off his hat, stared at the earth for a long, heavy moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough, quiet, but full of emotion. "Why would you think that'd change what I see in you?" She blinked, stunned. "Because you wanted more children. A family." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "I already have a family. 6 of them. I didn't send for a womb, Evelyn. I sent for a woman who'd stay. Someone who wouldn't run at the first hard winter or cry over what she couldn't change." He stepped closer, voice steady but soft. "I've seen women who could birth 10 young ones and never love a one of them. He paused, his throat working. "You've been mother, healer, and hope all in one. Don't you dare think you're less for something that wasn't your fault." Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes. Her lips trembled. "You're not angry?" "Angry?" He gave a small, tired smile. "No. Just sorry you carried that burden alone." He reached out, gently taking her hands, calloused palms against her trembling fingers. "I prayed for someone who could bring light back to this place. The Lord sent you. Maybe not the way I expected, but better." The words broke her open. She let out a sob she hadn't realized she'd been holding, and Caleb pulled her into his arms. She stiffened at first, then let herself lean into him, into the warmth, the safety, the simple strength of a man who didn't need her to be perfect, only honest. That evening, when the children gathered for supper, Evelyn noticed something different in Caleb's eyes. Softer. Proud. Annie asked, "Pa, why were you looking at her like that?" Caleb chuckled. "Because she's braver than all of us put together." Evelyn blushed, busying herself with the stew, but the little ones caught on quickly. They grinned, whispering among themselves. And when Caleb took her hand before grace, she didn't pull away. That night, after the lamps went out, Evelyn stood by the window, watching the moon spill silver over the pastures. The land stretched wide and wild before her, and for the first time she didn't feel like a stranger here. Her secret was no longer a curse, it was simply a part of her story. And somehow it had made their bond stronger. Out in the barn she could hear Caleb humming to the horses, a quiet tune, rough but warm. She smiled softly. The loneliness she'd carried across miles of prairie had finally found its rest. And though she hadn't been able to give him a child, she had given him something else, hope. The days shortened as autumn crept down from the mountains. Aspen leaves shimmered gold in the wind, and the air smelled of pine smoke and coming frost. Life on the ranch settled into rhythm again, mending fences, storing grain, preparing for winter. Evelyn found her place among them as naturally as breath. She rose before dawn, tended the hearth, helped the children with lessons, and met Caleb in the fields when work called for 2 pairs of hands instead of 1. And every night, when supper was done and the littlest ones fell asleep by the fire, Caleb would tell a story, his deep, steady voice filling the house. Evelyn would listen, sewing by the hearth, while he spoke of the old days, cattle drives and hard winters. The children called her Ma without hesitation now. Even Annie, proud and stubborn, slipped once and didn't take it back. But peace in Wyoming never lingered long. It began on a dry, wind-whipped afternoon. Caleb had taken 2 of the boys into town for supplies, leaving Evelyn and the others to tend the ranch. The wind carried a strange smell that day, sharp and bitter. When Evelyn stepped outside, she saw a ribbon of smoke on the horizon, black against the pale sky. "Wildfire," she whispered. Her heart stuttered. The fields were dry as tinder after weeks without rain. One spark could take everything. She ran to the barn. "Annie, get the little ones inside. Wet the blankets, quickly." The girl didn't ask questions. She moved like lightning, shouting orders of her own. Buckets of water sloshed. Evelyn hitched the horses, ready to lead them to safety if the wind turned. But the fire moved faster than she'd feared. Within an hour, orange light flickered through the trees. The wind carried embers like ghosts, whirling, glowing, landing where they pleased. Smoke thickened, choking the air. The children coughed, eyes wide with fear. Evelyn wrapped wet cloths around their mouths. "Stay low," she said firmly. "Do not leave this house unless I tell you." Then she grabbed a shawl and ran outside. The pasture fence was ablaze. The flames snapped and leapt high, feeding on the dry grass. The cattle bawled in panic. Evelyn's heart hammered. She could almost hear Caleb's voice in her head. "Keep calm. The fire's like fear. It grows if you feed it." So she didn't freeze. She acted. She soaked burlap sacks in the trough, slapped them against the flames, coughing through the smoke. Sparks stung her arms, her dress singed at the hem. Annie came running. "Ma, you'll get burned. Get back inside," Evelyn shouted. "Keep the children together." But the girl stood her ground, grabbing another sack. Together they fought the blaze inch by inch, sweat and smoke turning the air to fire itself. By the time Caleb rode into view, the world was red. The ridge behind the barn glowed like a furnace, and the smoke was thick enough to blot out the sun. "Evelyn," he roared, leaping from the saddle. He found her half-collapsed near the paddock, coughing, eyes streaming, but still swinging that soaked sack like a weapon against the inferno. He pulled her away, shouting over the roar of flames. "You're gonna get yourself killed." "The barn?" she gasped. "The horses?" "I'll handle it," he barked. "Get the children clear." She wanted to argue, but one look at his face told her she didn't have to. He would save what he could, and she would protect the rest. They moved the children to the creek bed, covering them with damp quilts as sparks rained down from the sky. Caleb fought like a man possessed, shouting orders to the older boys, dousing walls with water from the pump, dragging barrels, even cutting a trench to slow the spread. Evelyn prayed aloud, voice hoarse. "Lord, spare us. Please, spare these little ones." The fire raged through the night. But sometime before dawn the wind shifted. The flames veered away from the house and out toward the ridge, leaving behind smoldering earth and a silence almost too big to bear. When morning came, the world was gray and wet with ash. The barn roof was gone, half the pasture burned black, but the house still stood. The animals huddled in soot and fear, but alive. Caleb found Evelyn sitting by the creek with the children asleep in her arms. Her face was streaked with soot and tears, her hair singed, her palms raw from the sacks. He knelt beside her and spoke softly. "You saved them." She looked up, eyes glassy with exhaustion. "We saved them." He touched her cheek gently, thumb brushing away a streak of ash. "You've got more grit than any woman I ever knew." She gave a weak smile. "You've got soot on your nose." He laughed, a low, breathless sound full of relief and awe. "I'd marry you all over again, Evelyn Hart McAllister. Twice over." Her heart swelled at the words. Then maybe the Lord was watching after all. He nodded, glancing toward the smoking horizon. "Maybe he sent you to teach us all how to stand firm when the world burns." That night, the family gathered on the porch steps. The air smelled of smoke and damp earth, but above them, the stars shone brighter than ever. Annie leaned her head against Evelyn's shoulder. Caleb's arm rested around her back, solid and warm. The ranch had nearly fallen, but they hadn't. They'd stood together, fought together, and now they would rebuild together. Evelyn watched the flames in the distant ridge fade into embers and whispered, "Fire takes what's weak. What's left behind, that's the part that endures." Caleb squeezed her hand. "And that's us." That night, as sleep claimed her, Evelyn dreamed not of fear, but of new beginnings, green grass pushing through blackened earth, laughter echoing through a rebuilt barn, and a home no storm or fire could ever take again. The fire had left scars across the land, black streaks through the grass, the scent of smoke that lingered even after rain. But the first snows came early that year, soft and quiet, blanketing the wounds of summer in white. And beneath it all, life began again. Evelyn rose each dawn to the creak of the windmill and the distant call of cattle. The ranch was still healing, but so were they. Every fence rebuilt, every field reseeded, felt like reclaiming a piece of hope. Caleb worked from dawn till dusk, silent but steady, his strength no longer just for surviving, but for restoring. Evelyn watched him sometimes from the kitchen window, sleeves rolled up, hair damp with snow, his breath fogging in the morning air. Something had changed between them since the fire. They spoke more softly now, laughed more freely. Every touch lingered a little longer. Every glance felt heavier with meaning left unspoken. One cold afternoon, Evelyn found Caleb in the barn repairing a broken harness. The smell of hay and leather filled the air. She stood by the doorway, her breath forming white clouds. "Snow's thickening," she said. He looked up, smiling faintly. "I reckon we'll be snowed in by nightfall. Then we'd best get the animals settled." They worked side by side, the air crisp with the smell of winter. Caleb spread new straw for the horses, while Evelyn fetched warm water for the troughs. The quiet between them was easy, companionable. At one point she reached for a bucket just as he did. Their hands brushed, calloused, warm, familiar. She tried to pull away, but he didn't let go. Caleb's voice was low. "You still think you don't belong here?" Evelyn blinked. "Why would you ask that?" He stepped closer, his rough palm still holding hers. "Because I've been wondering if you know how much you've changed this place." "Changed me?" Her breath caught. He continued softly, "This ranch was just land before you came. Now it's home again. The children laugh. The house feels alive. And he hesitated, his voice roughening, "I can't picture a day without you here." Evelyn's eyes shimmered. "You mean that?" He nodded. "You're the answer I didn't know how to pray for." For a moment, neither moved. Snowflakes drifted through the cracks in the barn roof, settling in Evelyn's hair like silver dust. Caleb reached up, brushing them away gently, his hand trembling ever so slightly. She whispered, "I thought the Lord had forgotten me, after everything I lost." Caleb's eyes softened. He didn't forget. He was just waiting till the time was right. And then, without planning it, without words or reason, he leaned in. Their lips met softly, tender at first, then deeper, full of the ache and longing of two hearts long starved of warmth. The world seemed to fall silent. Only the slow beat of his heart and the faint creak of snow on the roof filled the air. When they parted, Evelyn's tears shone like stars. "I wasn't sent here to bear children," she whispered. "I was sent here to love the ones already waiting." Caleb smiled, a rare, quiet smile that reached his eyes. "And maybe to teach a stubborn old rancher how to live again." That night, as the blizzard rolled over the valley, the McAllister house glowed with lamplight. The children huddled near the fire while Caleb read aloud from the family Bible. Evelyn sat beside him, sewing by the light, her heart full. When his hand brushed hers between pages, she didn't flinch. The children pretended not to notice, but Annie smiled knowingly. Outside, snow fell thick and soft, blanketing the world in white. Inside, warmth radiated not just from the hearth, but from the love that had finally taken root. Weeks passed and Christmas drew near. The ranch, though scarred, had never felt more alive. The boys carved wooden toys, the girls hung pine branches around the windows, and Evelyn baked until the whole house smelled of cinnamon and home. On Christmas Eve, Caleb handed her a small box wrapped in cloth. Inside was a silver locket, tarnished but beautiful. "I found it in town," he said softly. "Figured you ought to have something that's yours." When she opened it, inside was a tiny scrap of paper. A prayer written in Caleb's rough hand. "For the woman who made strangers into family and ashes into light." Evelyn looked up, tears blurring her vision. "I'll treasure it," she whispered. "Always." Caleb smiled, his voice low and steady. "And I'll treasure you." Outside, snow whispered across the valley, soft as forgiveness. Inside, laughter and music filled the McAllister home. For the first time in years, Evelyn didn't feel like she'd borrowed her place in the world. She was home. And love, like rain after drought, had come at last, quiet, healing, and real. The first thaw came late that year, but when it did, it came all at once. Snow melted from the eaves in slow rivulets, soaking the earth until the grass shimmered green again. The smell of life, wet soil, sage and pine, drifted across the valley. Evelyn stood by the porch rail, the wind lifting her hair, sunlight warm on her face. The field stretched out before her, new grass pushing through blackened soil, calves wobbling on uncertain legs, and the laughter of children echoing like music. "Ma!" Little Tommy shouted from the yard, holding up a clump of wildflowers. "Look what I found." She smiled. "They're beautiful, darling. Let's put them in water before they wilt." He ran up the steps, tiny boots thudding, his grin wide enough to light the whole morning. Evelyn took the flowers, arranging them in a chipped jar on the windowsill. Simple things, but they made the room glow. The whole house, clean, mended, alive, seemed to hum with peace. Out by the barn, Caleb was working the plow, sleeves rolled high, his movements steady and sure. She watched him for a while, her heart swelling with quiet pride. There was something in him now that hadn't been there before, not just strength but contentment. He laughed more easily these days. Slept better. Prayed out loud again at supper. Sometimes she'd catch him looking at her the way he used to look at the open sky, like a man who'd found something worth building toward. When he finally saw her watching, he tipped his hat and called, "You gonna stand there admiring me all morning or lend a hand?" She laughed, taking her shawl. "You'd get less done without me and you know it." They worked side by side until the sun hung high. Caleb stopped to wipe his brow, glancing toward the hills. "Hard to believe it's been a year," he said softly. "A year since I stepped off that stagecoach," Evelyn murmured. "I remember thinking I'd made the worst mistake of my life." He chuckled. "And was it?" She met his gaze, eyes warm. "No. It was the start of something holy." Caleb grew quiet at that. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small, folded paper. "Got something for you," he said. She frowned curiously. "What is it?" He handed it to her. "The deed to this land. Your name's beside mine now." Her breath caught. "Caleb, He cut her off gently. "You've earned it. You're not just part of this family, you are this family." Tears filled her eyes. "I've never owned anything in my life." "Then I reckon it's about time you did," he said, his voice deep and tender. She looked down at the paper, then up at the man who'd become her safe place in a wild world. "You're certain about this?" Caleb nodded. "I don't make promises lightly. You're home now, Evelyn. For good." That evening the family gathered by the creek. The children splashed in the shallows while Caleb and Evelyn sat on the grass watching the sun dip low behind the mountains. The sky was a blaze of orange and violet, the air sweet with the smell of new spring. Evelyn leaned her head against his shoulder. "You ever think about how far we've come?" she asked softly. Caleb smiled, eyes on the horizon. "Every day." She was quiet for a moment. "I used to believe my life was over, that the part of me that could nurture, that could love, had died when I lost the chance to bear children." He turned to her then, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You did bear something, Evelyn. You bore hope. You breathed life into this place and into us." Her lips trembled and she whispered, "And you gave me a name to belong to." He kissed her then, slow, sure, like a man who'd waited all his life for this kind of peace. As twilight deepened, the children came running, cheeks pink, arms full of wildflowers and laughter. Annie, now taller, handed Evelyn a small wooden carving. "I made it," she said shyly. "It's us. All of us." Evelyn turned it over in her hands. It was rough, but she recognized the 7 small figures carved beside a larger one, all standing under the shape of a house. She blinked back tears. "It's beautiful." Caleb looked at Annie and said softly, "You did right, sweetheart. That's what family looks like." That night, after the children had gone to bed, Evelyn and Caleb sat together on the porch, a quilt draped over their knees. The valley lay silent, crickets singing in the dark. Evelyn whispered, "When I came here, I prayed the Lord would forgive my brokenness." Caleb took her hand. "He didn't need to forgive you, Evelyn. He just needed to show you where you belonged." She smiled faintly, eyes shining in the starlight. "And he did." The wind rustled through the aspens, soft as a lullaby. The house behind them stood warm and full of life, a testament to all they'd endured and rebuilt together. Caleb leaned close, his arm around her shoulders. "Whatever comes next," he said quietly, "we'll face it together." Evelyn rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. And under that endless Wyoming sky, with laughter and love within earshot, she finally knew. She hadn't come west to start over. She'd come west to arrive. Years later, travelers passing through the McAllister Valley would speak of a ranch that never turned away an orphan, a widow, or a wanderer in need. At its heart was a woman named Evelyn, her smile as warm as the hearth she kept, her faith unshaken. And beside her always stood the rancher who once thought he was praying for a helper, but had, in truth, prayed a woman like her into his heart.